Welcome back. You're listening to the Voice of Russia's weekly link-up with our bureaus in London, Washington, D.C. and Moscow. My name is Brendan Cole. Yesterday, Vincent Autain and Bruno Boileau said oui in the southern city of Montpellier when they became the first gay couple to wed in France. It came just days after the president, François Hollande, signed the same-sex marriage bill into law. But the new legislation has proved controversial and sparked violent protests. The anti-gay marriage lobby, backed by the Catholic Church and conservative opposition in the country, argues that the bill undermines an essential building block of society. There were mass street demonstrations that shook France, including violent clashes between far-right groups and riot police, 172 hours of heated parliament debate, and there was warnings of a 30% rise in homophobic acts. One man, Dominique Veneur, shot himself dead at the altar of Paris's Notre Dame Cathedral in opposition against the law. Meanwhile, in the United Kingdom, the issue is no less controversial. But MPs have voted to back the marriage same-sex couples bill. The plans will now go to the House of Lords for further consideration, and if passed by both Houses of Parliament, the bill will become law. So what of the gay marriage debate, which has culminated in legislation in France and 13 other countries? Well, here on the other side of the English Channel, what does it mean for the institution of marriage in the UK? Well, to discuss this and the issues surrounding it, I'm joined in the studio by the human rights campaigner Peter Tatchell, and also here joining me is Peter Norris. He's the communications manager at the charity Christian Concern. We'll be joined a bit later by our guests and our studios in Washington and in Moscow for an international perspective. But first of all, Peter Tatchell, yesterday, the culmination of months of debate in France. I mean, what's your reaction to this?
Well, people say that same-sex marriage is controversial in Britain and France, yet it has more public support than almost any other policy. Here in Britain, over 70% of the public in 3 major polls have said they support the right of gay couples to marry in civil ceremonies in register offices. 58% of religious people in Britain support same-sex marriage, and even among conservative voters, support for marriage equality is running at 57%. So this is not a particularly controversial issue. It has majority public support. There is a very vociferous homophobic minority who believe that gay people are unfit and unworthy. They are deeply prejudiced, hateful people. They support discrimination, but they are a tiny minority and do not represent the majority of French or British opinion.
Peter Norris from Christian Concern, those who oppose the idea of gay marriage being enshrined in law, homophobic.
Yeah, I disagree. I think we can have disagreements about sexual ethics without resorting to terms like bigotry and hatred. I think there needs to be room for diversity of opinion, and opinions on marriage are strongly held on both sides of the argument. But I think it's important that we draw a distinction between those who would resort to violence and homophobic acts, and those who are peaceful citizens but have strongly held beliefs about marriage being between one man and one woman. And I think the demonstrations in France, it's obviously extremely sad that some far-right extremist groups have joined in there and brought violence to the occasion. But there were many peaceful demonstrators there too. And I think in the UK, the conservative grassroots movement has shown that there are many ordinary men and women in the UK, conservative voters in particular, who really believe in the idea of marriage between one man and one woman. I think when you destroy that common understanding of marriage, it sets people against one another. So I don't think passing legislation settles the issue. I'm quite concerned that this will not be the end of hostilities, but it'll actually make things worse.
I think the principle is that in a democratic society, we should all be equal before the law. And just as much as I oppose any discrimination against Christians or other people of faith, I would hope that they would recognise that regardless of their personal view, the law of the land should not discriminate against gay people. And I'm sorry, but if you say that black people are not entitled to legal equality, you are a racist. If you say that gay people are not entitled to equal rights, including equal marriage, you are a homophobe. There's no way of getting away from this fact.
Is that a fair parallel, do you think, Peter?
Well, no, I think to say that the belief that marriage is between a man and a woman is a discriminatory belief is is unfair. I don't think that's right, and I think the attempted parallel with race is flawed. Race is an inalienable characteristic. There is at least some element of choice when it comes to sexuality, so I don't think that's a fair parallel.
But hang on, there's a choice about being a religious person. Yet I would never say because you choose to be a Christian, therefore you're entitled to lesser rights. I'd say you have a right to make that choice, and you have a right to have that choice respected and not subject to any discrimination. All I'm saying to you is, will you please reciprocate my view that you should be spared discrimination because of your faith, and allow me to be spared discrimination because of my sexuality?
Peter Norris, your response to that?
Well, I think that the disagreement comes on what we class as discrimination. I don't think it's discrimination to keep the law of the land as marriage being between one man and one woman, and I think that's where the rub is. I don't want to deny people because of their sexual orientation rights, but I wouldn't class marriage as a right. I think marriage is a unique institution between a man and a woman. I think that's the level.
But you don't oppose civil partnerships?
Personally, I would say in the sense that they mimic marriage. I think that's why we've come to the point where we're legislating, or could be legislating for same-sex marriage. So no, I wouldn't back civil partnerships either.
Peter Tatchell, can I just ask you? I mean, you made the point in the Evening Standard that a person who opposes legal equality for gay people is homophobic, and you've raised that point. There, you've referred to heterosexual supremacists who want to maintain their dominance and reserve for themselves the privilege of marriage. I suppose if you look at the protests in France and 150,000 people taking to the streets, they can't all be homophobic, can they? And perhaps their concerns should be taken on board just as a legitimate part of the debate, and if the debate shifts towards an agreement to marriage for gay couples, which it has in France, then those 150,000 people taken to the streets contributed to that argument.
Well, the people who oppose same-sex marriage have a very simple option. Don't marry a person of the same sex. Don't give wedding presents to couples of the same sex who get married. It is just a basic principle of live and let live. I'm not religious, but I would never dream of denying a religious person equality or discriminating against them in any way. It is about reciprocation. It's about recognition. We live in a diverse society. My mother is devoutly religious. She personally believes that according to the Bible, homosexuality is wrong. But she also believes that discrimination against gay people is wrong, and that's why she supports gay equality. She says discrimination is not a Christian value, and so she's very, very strongly of the view that Christians, whatever their point of view, should not discriminate against people because of their sexuality.
Peter Norris, quickly your response to that, and then we'll go to Washington.
Thanks. Again, I think a lot of this rests on the assumption of what you understand as marriage. If you're already thinking that marriage is an institution that is not necessarily between a man and a woman, but it can be but genders are relevant to the institution, then of course it comes across as discrimination if you're going to say that it shouldn't be between two people of the same sex. But if you're coming to it from the angle of, well, marriage is intrinsically a heterosexual social institution, then it's not discriminatory to say that marriage shouldn't be open to same-sex people. So
can I ask you, you support love and marriage. I support love and marriage. How does gay people getting married, if they love each other, diminish marriage? It actually strengthens marriage. I would have thought that as someone who supports love and marriage, you would welcome the fact that gay people want to get married, because that means that the institution has ever more strong social support.
And indeed, that was the point that David Cameron made, Peter Norris, that he was in favour of gay marriage because he's in favour of marriage. So there, and that's from the leader of the Conservative Party.
No, I disagree. I don't think it strengthens marriage. I think it further weakens it, and I think the institution of marriage has been weakened over decades, and this will be just another form of weakening the institution of marriage. It dilutes it, it loses its distinctiveness, and I'm not sure that many of the people campaigning for same-sex marriage are so supportive of the institution itself.
Okay, well, look, there's plenty of theories and ideas to touch upon there, but we'll just cross now to our Washington, D.C. studio with Rob Sachs.
Thanks so much, Brendan. I'm joined here by Dennis Dyson. He is Vice President of Communications at the Gay and Lesbian Victory Fund. He's also the Managing Editor of the Gay Politics Report. Dennis, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So we just heard a lot of back and forth from our colleagues in London, and I guess a lot of this boils down to, is this discrimination if you say that gay marriage cannot be allowed, or is it, you could also say it's discriminating against religious people who say that you are not allowing me to practice my religion because you are trying to redefine a essential tenet of what I believe.
What we're asking for is civil marriage, not religious marriage. There has not been an effort to make religions comply with same-sex marriage. Quite the contrary. Most of the laws that have been passed in the states in the United States have been specific in their religious freedom protections, quite explicit, and saying that in some cases not even religiously affiliated institutions must recognize these unions. So when I hear people of faith say that it prevents them from practicing their faith, it doesn't. It prevents them from perhaps living in a world where they pretend that there aren't gay people or gay couples because they have to. They will see gay couples. They will see married gay couples. But that's the price that you pay for freedom.
Dennis, here in this country, we saw not that long ago Congress passing the Defense of Marriage Act, defining marriage as between a man and a woman. We saw a number of states adopting changes to their constitution, saying that marriage should be defined between a man and a woman. But now, this month, a Gallup poll found 53% of Americans support same-sex marriage. That's up from 44% in just 2012 and 27% in 1996. There are separate polls measured at 55% in Arizona, 56% in Virginia, and 7% in Michigan. What accounts for this dramatic shift in these attitudes toward same-sex marriage?
One word, it's honesty. People are coming out, they're being honest about themselves. People who have gay people in their families or friends or in their workplaces or in their churches are speaking to them about their lives, and they're getting to know them. Harvey Milk back in the mid-'70s said that the most political thing any gay person could do then was to come out, not only to their families but to their friends and colleagues, and that would do more to change society. Because people would see the reality of who we are rather than the caricature or some abstract notion of what a homosexual is. And so as people have come out and been more honest, those barriers are falling, because I think people that love them understand that they are not out to wreck marriage or to change society in any appreciable way.
Well, now you have states like Massachusetts, Connecticut, Vermont, Iowa, New Hampshire, New York, Washington, Maryland, Maine, Rhode Island, Delaware, Minnesota, and possibly soon to be Illinois adopting laws that will allow for same-sex marriage. But you also have other states that are holding strong, trying to solidify their opposition to this. Are we going to see a red state, blue state divide, or what's going to happen if the country is split? Will this have to be addressed? I guess the Supreme Court already looked at the Defense of Marriage Act, but will this divide our country until there is one national law?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think the Supreme Court is considering two cases right now, one on the California Prop 8 referendum and the other on the Defense of Marriage Act. Most legal observers believe that they will strike down the federal definition of marriage. So you'll have these 12 or 13 states where same-sex couples can legally marry. They will also then be recognized as married by the federal government. They'll sort of be super marriage states at that point. It'll be interesting to see what happens then. Will that create an almost a magnet where states will have to decide, do we want to be like Illinois, Minnesota, New York, or do we want to be like Alabama, Mississippi, and Texas? And there's a lot of repercussions there in terms of business and commerce and attracting young professionals who want to work in those states. So the marketplace is actually going to become very interesting very soon.
I want to ask you one more question before we turn things over to our colleagues in Moscow, which is about gay adoptions. And this has been a lightning rod. There was a study that has been many say debunked, but still talked about, is a University of Texas Austin sociology professor, Mark Regnerus, I believe his name is, and he came out with this study saying that adult childs of gay and lesbians were more likely to get involved with drugs, get divorced, and be depressed once they, more so than children who grew up in heterosexual families. Is there any scientific evidence that we can look at? I mean, this study has been, shot through a lot because of the methodology, but still, some say there's some merits to looking at this. But is there any scientific evidence that shows that heterosexual lifestyle is harmful to our society as a whole, whether it's raising kids or having same-sex couples just be a part of everyday society?
The vast majority of the social science research shows that there is no effect on children by being raised by gay or lesbian parents. The study that you cite was debunked largely because it was not a study of kids who are raised by two-parent same-sex households, and there's a ton of backlash to that study. It was also, I believe it was funded by an anti-gay organization. But the vast majority of social science research shows that children of gay and lesbian parents fare no worse, and in some cases even fare better than children of heterosexual parents. It's unfortunate that we have to have sort of badly done studies funded by social conservatives in almost a kind of a desperate effort to find some evidence against gay parenting.
I want to turn things over to our colleagues in Moscow and the presenter Yevgeny Sukhoi.
So, Alexei, we've just heard what Flavio Romani, president of Italian LGBT group Archie Gay, had to say on the issue. And on the one hand, France is sort of setting a trend. On the other hand, as we know, François Hollande made legalizing gay marriages one of the key points of his presidential campaign. And still, last month, we saw a tremendous drop in his popularity. He had only 25%. So was that a mistake to make this legalizing of gay marriages a main point of his campaign? Because it doesn't seem to be very much supported by the public opinion in France.
Well, I would say that he made it a point, an important point in one of his debates with Nicolas Sarkozy, not of the whole campaign. The campaign was run mainly on economic and social issues, and that's for the debates which are designed to really win to your side those who are not undecided. So I suppose it was just a very logical way in a very close race to give a kind of some kind of a promise to those who could tip the vote in your favor. So that's clear. That was not a mistake. As much as his low popularity now may not necessarily be connected to this particular move. There are lots of problems in France with unemployment, with trade unions, pay pension age, etc., etc. So we should not reduce the whole thing to just one issue.
And in general, regarding those demos, can we say that it sort of reflects the fact that France is still not ready for this legislation?
Well, again, I suppose that this kind of reaction, it probably reflects that the people reaction to change which is not controlled by them. There's too much change. Too many things are changing. The communication environment, even the nature of person is changing. We have now, organs, and we speak about supplementing our organs. So we are less and less in control of our lives. And so I suppose that any kind of backlash to this new really change, which does present a change well, in my view at least, to people's fundamental understanding of what marriage is, this could be just a reaction to broader issues of insecurity and too rapid pace of change that is happening now.
Now, we've just heard what Flavio Romani had to say, and he was saying basically that Italy will now be able to follow France. So first of all, do you think many European countries will now follow France? And secondly, should they do it drastically or rather step by step?
Well, I suppose it's for each country to decide, because once again, I suppose it's it's really a matter of political setup, of how strong the LGBT lobby is, because basically democracy is about well-organized minorities sort of imposing their will of disorganized majorities. So there's a lot of this kind of things that can only be solved or understood on a level of particular society.
Now, some people say that referendum is one of the means that could be used to adopt such laws. Do you think it's possible to use referendum in such issues?
Well, why not? Again, if people feel like they want to do that, I think that there's no problem with that. Why not?
And what's your forecast concerning Europe? Is this practice going to spread?
Well, I would have thought so, yes, perhaps. Because we now see how it's developing, and usually if there is a trend in Europe, then it will be at least Western Europe-wide. I'm not sure this will play well in Central and Eastern Europe, with more generally conservative population, and I suppose that there maybe this is not an issue. Maybe they're looking at that, at the Western Europeans, and they're thinking, I mean, what's the whole buzz is all about? I mean, where's the problem? We can't follow that.
And why is that not an issue in Eastern Europe? What's your explanation?
Well, I don't know. I think it's just not an issue. It's one of those things that people start thinking about only when it comes from the outside as part of this globalization. And I think the new trend in Central and Eastern Europe is probably to resist globalization. So many people would just react negatively to that as reaction to something that is associated with the liberal West. Just as I just came back from Georgia, and I was really, I was shocked how suddenly anti-Western, anti-NATO the population became there. It seems like this couple of gay parades that were rather violently suppressed by the radicals, they somehow turned the people around the West and around NATO, against NATO. They said, if this is NATO, then they're all gays and lesbians, and we don't want that. And it's kind of a feeling that you can feel on the street. I did not study this problem specifically, but it's what you sense almost everywhere in all conversations. They're speaking about two things, whether Saakashvili, who was also the Western favorite, will be put to prison. And they're saying that they're now anti-NATO because they are supporting these same-sex marriages. You feel it there, just on the street, that you feel the vibrations there.
Well, thank you very much, Alexei, for your opinion. And now let's get to London. Brendan.
Thanks, Yevgeny. Here in London, I'm joined by Peter Tatchell and Peter Norris. Peter Tatchell, human rights campaigner. Peter, the protests that were referred to there in France were quite considerable, but here in the United Kingdom on the 21st of May, it's gone through the Commons. It's now going to go through the Lords. What does it say about the United Kingdom that it's unlikely to see tens of thousands of people take to the streets to oppose this? Does that say something healthy about British society? I mean, what do you make of it?
Well, first of all, can I just pick up a point from the Russian discussion? The request for same-sex marriage is not a Western issue. It's an issue of universal human rights. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, promulgated by the United Nations and signed by every member state, includes Article 12, the right to marry and found a family. It doesn't say the right of heterosexuals to marry. It says the right of every person to marry. That's one issue. Secondly, you will find that many of the countries which are legislating same-sex marriage are countries not long out of dictatorship, like Argentina. Argentina, as part of its democratization and human rights program, has legalized same-sex marriage because it wants to make a clear break with the dictatorship of the past. The same with South Africa. One of the earliest legislations passed by the new post-apartheid government was to legalize same-sex marriage on the principle that every South African should be equal before the law. Similar discussions and opportunities are happening in the parliaments in Nepal. They're considering same-sex marriage. In the parliament in Taiwan. All across the world, this is an unstoppable global trend because most people recognize this is a human rights issue, and if people love each other, they should have the right to get married.
Okay, well, picking up on some of those points, I'll pose the question to Peter Norris. from Christian Concern. He's the communications manager there. But first of all, we'll go to a short news update with Daniel Sinner. Welcome back. You're listening to The Voice of Russia. My name's Brendan Cole. Here in our London studio, we have Peter Tatchell, the human rights campaigner, and the communications manager at Christian Concern, Peter Norris. We're discussing gay marriage a day after France celebrated its first ever same-sex marriage. Peter Norris from Christian Concern, the point that Peter Tatchell raises there is a human rights issue, and it's enshrined under the UN Declaration of Human Rights. And also the point is that I suppose it's difficult for groups such as yours to argue against this. They're using without this issue of discrimination coming in, when effectively the crux of your argument is a biblical one. Am I not right? Am I right?
Certainly, from our perspective, being a Christian organisation, we would refer to the Christian scriptures. But I think there are many people of other faiths and of no faith who see the value of traditional marriage between one man and one woman. So I don't think it's restricted to people of Christian faith. I think there are many others who hold the same view and see the benefits of it for society.
Yeah, but it's a belief that stems from what they believe is said in the Bible and what Jesus has said, and a quote from Leviticus, of course, as the most famous one. I mean, the Bible sanctions and enshrines heterosexual marriage as far as groups like yours is concerned, and you have to make the argument that it's something that the public at large want as well.
Yes, and I think there'll be plenty of other people who wouldn't call themselves Christians who would also believe in marriage between one man and woman. I don't think the biblical basis is necessary. They don't see it as necessary, but we would say that's where we get our ideas from. And indeed, everybody needs a basis for their beliefs. And ours is what Jesus has taught in the Bible.
Well, can I just correct you there? Christians are followers of the teachings of Jesus Christ. He reportedly condemned many, many sins, but Jesus Christ in the Bible never once condemned homosexuality. So if you call yourself a Christian, I don't see how you can invoke Jesus Christ as a justification for opposing either homosexuality or, in particular, gay marriage, because the Christian gospel is about love and compassion, not about discrimination, division or exclusion.
It is about love and compassion, but I think the important point is that the only time Jesus talks about marriage, he talks about it as between one man and one woman. So it's not just about what Jesus condemned. There are many things that Jesus didn't condemn in the New Testament, but we would condemn. But it's his positive teaching on marriage. When he does mention it, he affirms the Old Testament teaching going back to creation of marriage between a man and a woman. So I think it's quite clear that Jesus' beliefs on marriage were that it's an institution between one man and one woman.
And it doesn't actually say that. With all due respect, it does not say that.
It says a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife.
But that doesn't preclude the fact that two men may fall in love, or two women.
But he says man and woman.
A
man will leave his family and be united to his wife, to a woman. It doesn't say...
Yeah, but that is not an exhaustive list. There's nothing in that teaching which says a man shall not love a man or shall not marry a man.
Well, there's plenty of things he doesn't exclude. He doesn't say this is what marriage is and then list a whole load of things that it isn't. He just says what it is, and it's according to Jesus, it's between a man and a woman. It's quite plain.
I think your interpretation is a bit liberal, but anyway. You're taking a bit of liberty.
Or conservative.
Okay.
But indeed, I mean, fundamentally, what we have here is that no religious organisation will be forced to carry out a same-sex marriage. And in fact, in practice, if you argue that the majority of Christians in this country would belong to, say, the Church of England or are Roman Catholics or whatever, this will actually only apply to a very small minority of churches that do want to... So this isn't something that's going to sweep the nation necessarily, and no one is forced to do this.
Well, I think the concerns are further down the line. For example, Church of England aren't included. They have to opt in to conducting same-sex marriages. But say, for example, that the Church of England decides in future they want to do it. But then, say, 10% of the ministers in the Church of England have conscientious beliefs on this matter, believing that marriage is between a man and woman. There are no legal protections in play for those individuals. So if the Church of England opts in as a whole, those ministers are open to legal challenge. So I think that's the concern, that there aren't adequate protections if this kind of bill goes through.
Peter Tetchell, are there adequate legal protections?
Well, in fact, the Church of England is not allowed to opt in. The law actually states that...
But in the future, if they did, there wouldn't be protections for individuals.
No, there would have to be a whole new legislation passed to permit same-sex marriage within the Church of England. There's a specific part of this legislation which says that even if the Church of England wants to conduct same-sex marriages, it's prohibited by law from doing so. Now, you raise a potential scenario many, many years down the line if there's new legislation. I'm sure there are ways around it. Just as the Church of England has found ways around...
It's fine to say that, but...
Well, hang on. The Church of England has a rule that certain that individual priests are not required to marry divorcees. That's never been challenged. It conflicts with civil law, but it's been accepted, and so I don't think there's any need for worry or anxiety on this score at all.
Okay, we'll cross out to our studio in Washington, D.C., to Rob Sachs.
Thanks so much, Brendan. And once again, we're joined by Dennis Dyson, Vice President of Communications at the Gay and Lesbian Victory Fund. He's also Managing Editor of the Gay Politics Report. And on that last part, in terms of the political discussion around same-sex marriage, we heard from our colleagues in Moscow about the political calculations leaders have to make whether or not to push for same-sex marriage. There is the idea that perhaps Francois Hollande in France is maybe suffering in the polls, perhaps related to his stance for gay marriage. In other places, maybe in Eastern Europe, where it is not as popular in the polls, leaders who are for it may be suffering politically. Here in the United States, there's been this immigration bill, wide-sweeping bill that has been trying to make its way through Congress. In the Senate, there was a provision being supported by Patrick Leahy, the independent senator from Vermont, who said immigration equality, having same-sex couples be allowed to bring in their partners should be part of this bill. That was ultimately removed because of political considerations, those on the right saying, no, this larger immigration bill will not pass if that part is in it. So when you're thinking about including laws for LGBT individuals, how do you make that calculation? When is the time right to push for certain things?
Martin Luther King said, "Justice delayed is justice denied." It's our job as advocates to push our elected leaders to do the right thing. That is not always possible. Sometimes they make very tough political choices, even those who are our allies. The immigration bill is a perfect example of that. You have a fragile coalition working to get the first major immigration reform through. When a significant portion of that coalition says we will drop the entire bill, we will kill immigration reform in this country in order to continue to discriminate against same-sex couples, they're basically threatening you, and they can back that up. So a tough decision was made to not introduce that amendment by Patrick Leahy, who, by the way, is a Democrat, not an independent. He would tell you, but he would. And that the hearing in which he withdrew that bill was heart-wrenching to listen to. He could not understand why people were so intent on discriminating against same-sex couples that they would scuttle an entire finely crafted bill like the one that's before them now.
I was thinking of Bernie Sanders, the other senator in Vermont. But thinking about, though, the timing of this, could you look back and say perhaps the push for Proposition 8 in California was too early? You didn't have the popular support I mentioned before. How many more people now are in favor? Maybe almost double where it was in 1996. Was it too early to push for Proposition 8 in California to try to get same-sex marriage there? Thinking about it now in hindsight.
Prop 8 actually reversed same-sex marriage in California, and it was an incredibly well-funded effort by a lot of very conservative organizations, including the Mormon Church here in the United States. And it passed barely, and this is back again in 2008. There has been a sea change even since then. 5 years later, Nobody thinks that Prop 8 would pass today in California. Nobody. And the Mormon churches actually said they're done fighting these battles and they're not going to put their money behind it anymore. There was a moment during which the opinion polls started to shift on this. Today, 5 years after that, it's a new world.
Want to give our colleagues in Moscow a chance to weigh in? Evgeny Sukho?
So, Alexei, our colleagues in London were talking about the factor of religion. What's your opinion here in Russia? Legalizing gay marriages doesn't have much public support. So is it a matter of religion, first of all? And secondly, my question is whether you think that Russian society is actually homophobic, as many think.
First of all, I think that legalizing same-sex marriage is out of the question here. It has very little to do with religion, because Russians, even if it's now sort of fashionable to go to church, they're not really religious, but they are pretty conservative outside some sort of narrow circles in big cities. And I would say that at least Orthodox religion, by opposing this, is just winning the favors of Russians, first of all. And secondly, Russian society, of course, it's very complex. I suppose that somewhere in the northern Caucasus, you could call this and it is quite homophobic. I suppose that Russian society in general, without sort of not speaking of exceptions, of course, is not homophobic. It's very, very tolerant to people being homosexual, to people actually living together. What they really, again, that's my gut feeling, they begin to oppose when they feel it's becoming like an exhibitionism. That's what immediately makes them homophobic and less tolerant than they would have been otherwise.
Well, thank you very much, Alexei. I'm afraid that's all we have time for. Let's get to London. That was my expert, Alexei Pankin.
Thanks a lot, Yevgeny. Some points there, Peter Tatchell, interestingly, about Russia, I suppose. But I mean, from now on, it looks like in the United Kingdom, at least, it will go through the House of Lords, won't it? You're very confident of that, I would imagine.
Pretty confident. We can't be absolutely certain because the House of Lords has its own independent mind, and who knows. But I think it will be carried. It would be very strange if the House of Lords overturned a bill which had such overwhelming support in the House of Commons and which has such overwhelming support among broad public opinion.
And what kind of political capital do you think David Cameron has expended in putting this on the agenda, putting this on the table and getting it through?
Well, I began the campaign for marriage equality in Britain way back in 1992, so it's been a 21-year battle. And I've got to say that until very recently, in fact, until less than 2 years ago, David Cameron and the Conservatives did not support marriage equality. But what helped change them was the fact that we brought a case in the European Court of Human Rights where 4 same-sex couples sought to overturn the ban on same-sex marriage, and 4 heterosexual couples sought to overturn the ban on opposite-sex civil partnerships. Under British law at the moment, a same-sex couple is banned from having a marriage in a register office, and a heterosexual couple is banned from having a civil partnership in a register office. So we've got these 2 twin discriminations. Civil marriages exclude gay couples, civil partnerships exclude heterosexual couples. We're saying that both are wrong, and I think it was in response to that legal case that David Cameron realised the game was up, that we're very likely to win, and he didn't want to send a minister to Strasbourg to argue for the defence of a homophobic discriminatory law. So that's how the change has come about. I think it has actually been both a positive and a negative for him. I think among many liberals, support or sympathy or whatever for the Conservatives has probably increased because they've seen him championing, an issue of equality and non-discrimination, in contrast to the awful policies of the government on austerity and public spending cuts. But on the other hand, it has provoked a backlash against the hardcore conservative and religious fundamentalists who are very insistent on keeping marriage the way it is. So he has created quite a big problem for himself in terms of the fact that at the last vote in the House of Commons just over a week ago, more Conservative MPs voted against same-sex marriage than voted in favour.
We'll have to leave it there. Unfortunately, we've run out of time, but that's a human rights campaigner, Peter Tatchell, and joining me in the studio, Peter Norris, who's the communications manager at Christian Concern. In Washington, we had Andrew Sachs with Dennis Dyson, who's the vice president of communications at the Gay and Lesbian Victory Institute, and in Moscow, Yevgeny Sukhoi with Alexei Pankin, who's a political analyst and columnist. Stay tuned. We turn next to our weekly...